Aperture is the first step of exposure, as the light passes through the lens. The opening inside the lens is called the aperture. And it works much the same way the pupil of your eye does. When you look in the mirror in a dark room, you'll notice that your pupil is really large. That's because it's opened as wide as possible to accept as much light in as possible. When there's a lack of light, it needs to open further to allow more light in. If you compare that to the pupil of your eye on a bright and sunny day, you'll notice that the pupil is a lot smaller, much narrower. That's because it doesn't need to be as wide, because it is actually trying to stop some of the light coming in, otherwise it would be too bright. First though, let's talk about the f-stop scale. Every stop means a doubling of the amount of light, and if you were to go backwards, it would mean halving the amount of light. Starting with f1.4, that is the aperture on this lens at its widest possible setting, and it will allow the most possible light into the camera. Then to f2, that allows half as much light, that is one stop difference. Then 2.8, that's half as much again, or a quarter as much as f1.4. Then to f4, f5.6, f8, f11, f16 and f22. Each of those stops, we are halving the amount of light that goes into the camera. Although the numbers may be confusing, it's just like going from ISO 3200 to 1600 to 800, 400, 200, then 100. Each time we're halving the amount of light. So why does the f-stop scale look the way it does? Why is it f2 and f8 and f5.6 and such a weird scale of numbers? Well, it's actually for mathematical reasons. And I know when I talk about photography and maths, you can sometimes get overwhelmed and it becomes more confusing and less helpful than just knowing the facts. So I'm not going to go into too much detail on this, but what I will say is that it's a mathematical equation. It's f, standing for focal length, divided by 2 or 2.8 or 4 or 5.6. And it's that accompanied by the likes of the diameter of the opening of the lens and Pythagoras' theorem that you can work out the exact area of the aperture of the lens. So it's a mathematical equation, that's why it uses a completely different scale in terms of the numbers that are used compared to shutter speed or ISO. As photographers, we really don't need to know much more about it than that. And I've found that it really does serve to confuse people if I go into too much detail. So if you'd like to learn more and you're fascinated by mathematics, then I will link to an article below this video. But now let's go back to the aperture scale. As I mentioned, when we change one f-stop, we change by one stop of exposure, either halving or doubling the amount of light. I'm going to take a photograph of the scene behind me here. We've got some palm trees, a bush and some olive trees in the background. And I've set my camera to 100th of a second, f5.6 and ISO 200. As I take a photograph, I can see that's a well-exposed photo. And now I'm going to go back to f1.4 and I'm going to work my way through the aperture scale so you can see how the light in the scene changes by one stop each time. So by adjusting this dial here on manual mode, I can go to f1.4, take a photo, f2, f2.8, f4, back to f5.6, f8, f11, f16, and because this lens only goes to f16, I'm going to switch out for the 24 to 70 quickly. And finally f22. As we flick through those photos, you'll see the photos start off 4 stops overexposed and they end up 4 stops underexposed, each time changing by 1 stop of light. It's that 5th photo in the middle at 5.6 that is correctly exposed. One final thing you may be wondering is, why does a higher number in the f-stop scale mean less light? Surely a higher number means more light. Well, you need to remember that it's f divided by, it's focal length divided by a number. It's a fraction. When you take 100 and you divide it by 22, the result is a smaller number than if you took 100 and you divided it by 2, which is why you have less light at a higher number f-stop. When you start looking for lenses with wider apertures, like a 50mm 1.2 or 24 to 72.8, they start to get a lot more expensive, but I would definitely say they're worth the investment. One thing that will really help your photography is the abundance of light. When you have more light available to you, it's easier to create an exposure. A 50mm 1.8 lens is a great place to start because it can be picked up for about $100 depending on the brand that you buy, and will definitely help you to learn aperture. So let's go through that scale again of aperture. It starts at 1.4, f2, 2.8, 4, 5.6, 8, 11, 16, and 22. I've only told you the exact stop numbers throughout this scale. It's worth mentioning though that in between these stops you will find third stops as well. So f1.4 goes to 1.6, 1.8, and then 2. You can make minor adjustments. It doesn't have to be whole stop adjustments, and you'll find that's true for shutter speed and most likely ISO on your camera too.
Hey, thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, go ahead and check out the links in the description below. We've got a couple articles for you and also a link to my course, Photography for Beginners. It's an online course for beginners, and it is everything you could ever want to know to get started with photography. And also, if you enjoyed this content, please consider subscribing. We're releasing new videos every Monday at 12 PM London time, so you'll see much more content like this. Thanks for watching, and I look forward to seeing you in the next video.